Wiring a project is tricky because there's huge consequences if you do it wrong. The first consequence is, man, it doesn't work right. You know, you're constantly blowing fuses, maybe the switches don't work, the lights don't light up right. The bigger consequence is if you jack it up too much, you can burn your project right to the ground, and that's pretty scary. But at its heart, wiring is so simple. It really is. The power comes from the battery, goes through a fuse or a circuit breaker, then to a switch, then powers a device, and then the ground side goes back to the battery. Now, yes, you can make circuits more complex than that. Depending on the project, you can throw relays in there, you can throw double pole, double throw relays, you can have reversing motors, there's all kinds of stuff. The good thing is the aftermarket has made that job, or the job of wiring a vehicle, so much simpler. There are so many items out there that you can get to make your job a lot easier to do in the long run. And that's today's job. Today's job is wiring the wagon front to back, top to bottom, every single circuit, everything that I'm ever gonna need. That way, when it comes time to turn the key, it'll fire right up every single time I get in that truck. And honestly, I kinda like wiring. I find it relaxing. Maybe I'm weird. So this is a pile of stuff that all has to end up in that wagon basically by the end of the day. So the biggest mistake I see people make when they wire their project is they don't get everything that they need. The best advice I can give everybody is if you plan to put it in the vehicle, make sure you have it, and that way you don't end up with a bunch of extra harnesses laying on top of each other. And I mean everything. So I've got engine harness, got some speaker wire stuff, I got some speaker wire, I got a power port that I want to put at the back, I have my grid heater for the engine, got some off-road lights, I have an actual wiring harness I'm going to put in there, and some gauges and some other stuff and a whole bunch of stuff. So I guess my thought process is I'm going to start at this end of the table and work my way that way. I start any wiring job by making sure that all the items that are going to need power are installed onto the project. And then I like to test them with a power probe just to make sure they work. In this case, I got to do a little bit of fab to install my electronic parking brake assembly. Then I need to install the solenoids for my shaved door handles. The wiper motor can go into the header panel. And this rig is also getting heat and air conditioning with a Vintage Air Magnum 4 system. So I need to put that in place on the firewall. This helps me know where all the harness needs to lay. I've mounted the painless wiring fuse block down here on the floor. It will be covered by a center console and it'll have a removable top, so I'll be able to access it if I have to. Now, one thing you need to remember when wiring a rig like this, the painless system, it's here basically to take care of all the regular car stuff. You know, it'll power my AC, lights, turn signals, basically everything you'd find in a regular car. When you're talking about an off-road rig, there's always extra stuff that you add to the pile, whether that's, you know, I got an air compressor, I've got to energize my front locker, I've got off-road lights, I'm gonna have some power ports in the back for a fridge if I put it back there. All that stuff needs to have switches. The easiest and best way to control all that stuff is with one of these Switch Pro solid state controllers. Now this basically gets mounted either under the hood or inside the car like this, and then it just has a small little switch bank with programmable switches that you can set up to run anything that you want and label them any way you want. Now there are some knockoff switch panels that look similar to this that you can get online super cheap. Trust me, I've bought them to try them to see if they're any good. They don't last. They constantly blow fuses, the switches wear out, and that just becomes a pain in the neck. This is the same panel that you're going to find in like trophy trucks or Ultra 4 cars. It's definitely worth investing in one of these high quality switch panels for your rig. It's going to be a little bit more money. It's going to save you a lot of headaches in the long run. I like to install a large 150 amp circuit breaker in between the battery and the feeds for all the harnesses. The painless kit comes with a fuse, but I prefer to use one of these resettable circuit breakers instead. Then it's time to just start hooking up wires. The painless book makes this super easy. Just pick a circuit and start from there. I like to begin with the ignition switch. I find the wires in the correct section in the harness, strip the end of the wire, add the eyelet, and mount it to the correct terminal lug. Key to clean wiring install is to also include any additional harnesses at the very beginning. My Cummins R2.8 must pass through the firewall, and I have a couple connections to make into the painless harness, one for the ignition key on and one for the tach feed. The Pro Series harness uses non-insulated connectors and shrink tubing. I think these just look much cleaner than the insulated connectors you can get at your parts store. Now my harness didn't come with a headlight switch, but the instructions do explain how to wire up most OEM and aftermarket switches. The Pro Series harness even comes with the correct connector for the switch that I bought. And once all the terminals are crimped onto the wires, they're simply installed into the connector, and the switch, it's hooked up. Honestly, wiring is not that hard. The reason that I say mount all the hard components in place is so you know where the wires can go. The harnesses like this one from Painless, they're pretty universal, and you have to think ahead a little bit. Like, here's a perfect example. The wire to start the engine, basically energize the coil on an old vehicle, it was run out underneath the hood in this harness, but I don't need that. I need it up here to basically connect in to the harness for my Cummins R2.8. So you have to think through each one of those steps. And then after that, it's just basically taking each individual component, figuring out what wires need to go, reference the book, and then basically make individual little looms. As you can see, I got the wiring headed up to the ignition switch. I have my headlight switch done now. And now all I'm gonna do is wire up this little high beam, low beam foot thing. I don't know what that's called, but dimmer switch, that's what it's called. A tool that makes a harness look a lot more professional, it's a label maker. I label any wire that I add to the harness as well as relays and switches so I'll know what they are in the future. The painless harness also has to go through the firewall. Make sure you use a grommet here to protect the wires. These are all the wires for the front lights, a battery connection, engine temp and oil pressure sensor, as well as the AC compressor on wire. I like to twist my harness to keep it tight. I tape it about every 12 inches and then install chassis braid cover over the entire thing. So now I have all of the harness wires run where they're gonna go. I've added all the additional circuits in off my Switch Pro's circuit panel and all my additional audio circuits as well, so I know where everything's gonna land. Back seat's gonna sit right about here, so the plan is the harness is gonna come into the back, it's gonna split off, it'll run the speakers on either side, power's gonna go back to a power port, and then back to the rear taillights. All I have to do now is run all these wires where they're gonna go, secure them to the floor, and cover them with the chassis braid. The The way I designed this harness was to make the body harness and the chassis harness completely separate. I'll have a connection at the front bottom on both driver and passenger side. If I ever need to take the body off, I simply got to disconnect those two connections and lift the body up out of the way. It just makes my life a lot simpler in case I ever have to service this thing in the future. All I got to do now is start working on the wiring from the firewall forward. For the connections at the chassis, I'm using a Summit Racing Weather Pack connection kit. These are like OE connectors. They're just great whenever the connection is going to be in a high moisture environment, like the bottom of this firewall. To determine the location of this front wiring harness, I obviously need the fenders and grille in place. Then I can run the harness, hook up, and test the headlights. At the back of the truck, I'm wiring up a rear power port assembly. This will power a fridge or anything I need to charge in the back of the rig, as well as the tail lights, and of course, testing them with the power probe as I go. Then, bolt in the battery. In this case, I'm using an Optima yellow top. And don't forget your ground straps. The Pro Series harness comes with a bunch of ground straps. You need one from the frame to the engine, one from the frame to the body, and then you'll take the ground from the battery down to the frame. With the wiring all in place now, we are super close to having this vehicle ready to go over and get the finished bodywork and paint done to it. I just put the fenders on and the grille in place so I could make sure the harness was the right length, and then I will be taking these back off when we paint the vehicle, but I need to have them in place, obviously, so we can finish out a few more key items. But, whole lot of wiring finished here in the Big Tire Garage today, and I'm super happy. I can't wait to turn the key, fire up the motor, and most importantly, turn on the air conditioning.